Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tamara and we are here today to review another book. Not just any book, we're reviewing the next book in our Throne of Glass journey, which is Assassin's Blade. Now, reading order. I have decided to do the emotional journey reading order, which was recommended to me, instead of the publication reading order of this book series. With that being said, that would have meant that I have already read Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, and this was apparently recommended as my third book choice. So I have just finished this book as of yesterday. I almost did a review right away when I finished it, but I thought it would be fair if I slept on it, because I will be honest, this was not my favorite book in the slightest, and I feel all kinds of feelings about it because it's not what I expected. So for transparency, I knew this was a prequel to the events of Throne of Glass. And I feel like I also heard a lot of great things about this book, and that this book just explains so much and you need to read it because everything's confusing until you read this book, and it's meant to answer all these undying questions. I did not find exactly that when it came to my experience. So let's get into it. For full spoilers, well, sorry, this is a spoiler talk, so if you don't want to be spoiled, step aside, come back. If you do, then let's just jump right on in. I gave this book a 3 out of 5, and I'll be honest, I almost gave it a 2 out of 5, and I had to really stop and think about the why. And we're going to go through it, but this makes me sad to even say 3 out of 5, to be honest, because if you've seen my first two reviews for Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, I have been raving about this. Like, I have given those books a 4 out of 5, wanting to give them a 5 out of 5, and the only reasons I didn't was because I was like, no, it has to get better from here. I should maintain some restraint and not give it a 5 because it's obviously going to get better. But this book really threw me for a loop with how much I wasn't the biggest fan of it, because then I'm like, what the heck? If I did the publication order of this book series and read this first, I don't think I would have continued on reading the Throne of Glass series. This book did very little for me. It obviously had its pluses, some strengths, but for the most part, I just didn't feel like this book was needed. So let's talk about it. And I'm sorry if I'm not like if I'm not in the favor of what the rest of the world thinks of this book. To me, I could have done without, and let's talk about it. So like I mentioned before, I feel like a lot of people mentioned to me that this book, all the confusion you got from Throne of Glass, you get all of those like missing pieces in this book. Now, I gave credit when I read Throne of Glass that like the book development with regards to the world building and the character development, I fully understand what was happening. Like, I was not confused in the slightest. I felt that it actually described things incredibly well. And I give a lot of credit for that reason. So in terms of confusion and this book filling in the blanks, there wasn't that many blanks to be filled in for me. Like, I genuinely understood everything. I understood where everyone was world-wise, like the different areas. The only eluding mystery is what happened to Sam, because obviously they were saying that Sam is probably one of the only people that our female lead really cared for. There was like a mystery as to like who's to blame also for putting her in this predicament that we start off with Throne of Glass. We had our suspicions as to who it was, but this book just really confirms the mystery. But that's kind of it. Like, for me, like, yeah, they satisfied the mystery, but I don't think it explained enough stuff to warrant the hype this book got. Not that there was anything to explain either. So that's kind of why I'm like, question mark as to what those people were saying to me about that. But in general, this book had like 5 subsections within it. And I understood that the subsections, regardless, somehow tied to either what we know thus far in the series or tied to like the big reveal as to what happened to Sam and who betrayed her. That was the ending of this book. And honestly, probably the last quarter was the most interesting to me. I did enjoy reading these other subsections. Like I said, there was 5, but they were all kind of like mini stories about our female lead and like Easter eggs as to why she says specific things, like why she knows specific things when we're in the first and second books, like the ones you've already read. And probably there's going to be more ties to this in Heir of Fire, which is the next book I'm going to read too. Who knows? But I just feel like all of the ties and the Easter eggs from this book that were kind of like Oh yeah, I remember she said that earlier with the other two books. They were so loose, like they weren't like big revelations. Yeah, they're nice to see the Easter eggs and to kind of see where her character really came from in terms of like how confident she's been in as an assassin, her relationship with, obviously, I feel like I always wanted to call him Aberdeen, but I don't think that's what it is, but Abrin, or like the, the king of the assassins, we'll just put him that way. And like that whole relationship, if it was like more like father daughter, if it was like lover but didn't acknowledge it, like all of that, I will give credit that you got a lot more of him in this, which obviously they mentioned him and having some big reputation, but you don't know anything about him truly in the books we've read thus far. So I will give full credit that his character and Sam were probably the only two characters I cared to know and get to know in this book. Everyone else was just kind of like, man, they're a little bit forgettable. And you really only get the bulk of like the relationship between Sam and the King of Assassins at the beginning of this book, like the first subsection, and then the last two subsections. So the middle was a little bit of fluff, and I didn't think it was needed. But in general, I didn't think this book was needed. They could have literally told us all about Sam and all about who betrayed her and everything in the course of the actual timeline of the books instead of as a prequel. But they want to give it details, I get it. I will admit that her growing affiliation with Sam and how they kind of became lovers at the end, I didn't realize they were like competitors for pretty much the King of Assassins like prodigy title. I didn't know that, so it's a little bit of enemies to lovers, which surprised me when I read that, because I'm like, oh, okay, everyone knows how much I love me enemies to lovers. So I was very into it, if that's what I was getting into, is an enemies to lovers eventual plot point. And it did start off as that. I was highly amused, but then there was a break where we're separated from Sam and the King of Assassins to some other mini stories, which I get why we did it. Like, she made a friend, and they allude to in the Throne of Glass series that she's really bad at making friends. And so we like Easter eggs. We mentioned this. There's Easter eggs, but they didn't really matter all that much to me. So when it got back to like the real plot points we wanted to see, so the King of Assassins and Sam and how their relationship was growing, I will admit that the development of Sam and her, at first I was like, oh my God, I'm so into this, like when he like confessed his feelings and she was so stuck in her ways, not wanting to confess his feelings, but was thinking about him the whole time they were apart. All of this, when he said, I love you, when he saved her when she was drowning in a sewer, all of that came, I feel like, to an all-time high for me. And I thought, because we know Sam doesn't make it, right? So I thought in like the peak of that high, he dies. And I was on the edge of my seat thinking that that's what's going to happen. Like, they wouldn't have time to revel in their emotions. They probably get like an intimate moment and that's it. So I feel like I was on the edge of my seat only for it to drag out a little bit afterwards, with them living together, with them trying to have a future. And they gave some chapters to that, which I didn't expect to read, if I'm being honest. And I feel like it took the weight and height away from Sam and him being her person, because they dragged it out. And then when he actually was revealed to have died and how he died, I felt very minimal, like I didn't feel anything. And I feel like they took that opportunity away, because I thought that when they're in the height of those feelings, that's when they're going to pull it from underneath of us. And that's how we're going to be like mourning Sam. And I loved Sam's character. I really did. But I feel like they dragged that romance at the end out to a point where like, we're like, okay, so Sam's going to die. Okay, he died. We were like, move on. Like it didn't have any weight to me at all. And I feel like that was unfortunate, because I was fully invested in her and Sam until the end when they dragged it out a little bit. So I was like, this sucks, because that was what we were waiting to see. And so I was really bummed. And then like the King of Assassins, we knew he was the one who turned her in. Like, I suspected that right away when we first read it in Throne of Glass, and she was like, no, it couldn't be him. It couldn't be. I wouldn't let myself think it's him, blah, blah, blah. It was obviously him. And that's why, like, to me, as much as the surprise factor and like how Sam died was a little underwhelming, like we mentioned. So to read this entire book only for it not to hold as much weight as we hoped for, meaning like me, was underwhelming. And then I already knew about the King of Assassins. It's just like, the drive as to why he did that to her was also just like, meh. Like, I don't know. It didn't hold any pull there either. It's just like, what? He was jealous. He didn't want to share his things, meaning he had some like weird affection for her that was also romantic, but also fatherly. It was one of those really weird relationships where I didn't know how I felt about it, and it kind of made me a little uncomfortable just because of their age gap too. That I was like, he wants her romantically, but they're like, she could be his dad. Like, it was weird. It was just weird. And then it was all underwhelming. Like, I feel like the entire build up to the end, as entertaining as it was to read, it was underwhelming. And I feel like as I'm talking about this, I feel like I should give it a 2 because I don't think I've said enough positive to really justify a 3. But at the end of the day, I love our main lead so much, and I liked Sam, that I'm just kind of like, and I understood why they did what they did in terms of the subsections leading into this big revelation. I just don't think this book was necessary. I really don't. And like I said, if I started with this, I would not have continued reading this book series. It was so slow, so slow. It took me like 4 days to get through this. And this book isn't that big. Like, I would have flown through this in a day if they held me interested, like I have been for the other ones. So I've heard Heir of Fire is incredibly good. Like, it's like almost like a payoff for tolerating this book. So I'm hopeful that everyone who's told me that is right. But other than that, we're going to stick with 3 out of 5. But I was really disappointed in this. So here's to the next book review when we get there. Heir of Fire is coming next. Bye for now.